Thank you for joining us today. For this session, Muh Rahmatullah will be giving a talk titled Adding Flutter app to your existing mobile app. Mr. Rahmat is a software engineer with 4 years of mobile of development experience, focusing on designing and developing apps using native Android and Flutter framework. He's interested in low-level stuff and developer tooling to increase developer happiness. He's currently working at Grab as a Flutter engineer and making sure food and mart merchants have a delightful experience when using the Grab merchant app. He also loves to share his knowledge by speaking at tech community events. Nowadays, some people tend to not adopt Flutter into their business because they believe that it will require a lot of effort to migrate the existing application that is already written natively. But you can actually try Flutter and integrate it to those existing app by using Flutter add to app capacity. So in this talk, we're going to dive in on what is Flutter add to app, why we need it, and how we're going to do it. So by the end of this session, Mr. Ahmed will be answering questions towards the end of their talk. So if you have any questions, feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box, or you can ask your question at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Ahmed.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Assalamualaikum. Thank you, MC, for the kind introductions. I'm really excited to be able to deliver a talk in DevFest Brunei, but unfortunately, due to some circumstances, I'm unable to attend there physically. But I wish I could visit Brunei sometimes in the future. And yeah, I'm currently working as a mobile engineer at Grab. For you that might don't know what Grab is, so basically Grab is a super app in Southeast Asia. We provide a service such as ride-hailing, food delivery, express, bill payment, and so on and so forth. And here at Grab, I'm responsible for Grab Merchant app, which this app is 100% written using Flutter. Yeah, so that's why I'm going to talk about Flutter. And yeah, as DMC mentioned, that I will be talking about adding Flutter app into your existing mobile app. I'm going to give you like an overview, like why you should consider to use Flutter in your existing mobile app, and how we're going to implement it, and what are the current limitations. Okay, so before continue, maybe everybody on the chat or like maybe in the room could raise your hand if you are working on a mobile app, or like you are a mobile developer. Okay. Assuming on a mobile app, you might thinking like, especially if you're working on a native mobile app development. When you are working with a native mobile app development, that means that you need to maintain two code bases for each platform that you are targeting. For example, in Android, you will use the Kotlin and Android Studio. For iOS, you will use Swift and Xcode. And for a company, this can like improve cost into your day-to-day business, because you need to hire, for example, 2 developers to maintain each platform. And in the future, like as the project become bigger and more complex, the build team of your native app will be gradually slow. Like for my example, like in my experience, I was maintaining a huge and complex app. I need to have like at least 1 hour to perform a clean build on that app, which is really painful, and like it is totally a productivity killer. And we are, as a mobile app developer, should like find a way to be able to solve these problems. And yeah, how can we actually solve the problems? And yeah, as an engineer, like we need to figure out. So basically, like there may be like a lot of way, but in this particular talk, I will like try to give you like a new perspective into like why you should consider Flutter to your solutions. So Flutter for the rescue. Like you Flutter. So if you have like an experience using Flutter, you might know that like Flutter is a cross-platform framework, which basically means like with a single code base, you could actually deploy to multiple platforms such as Android, iOS, web, desktop, like, or even embedded systems. And it provides fast development environment with the very well-known feature is hot reload. You could simply reflect your changes. We don't need to basically rebuild the entire applications. And Flutter comes with the powerful UI framework, which means that it comes with a rich set of widgets, either a material design widget for Android or Cupertino design for iOS. But on top of that, you could actually build your our custom design based on your app design language. And last but not least is Flutter is an open source project by Google, which means that it has a bigger and powerful support behind the scene. And one thing that we can confirm is Flutter have a bright futures because it backed by Google. And with all of those considerations, this is the next question, like many people are asking when they are thinking about adopting Flutter app into their own business flow. Into their own business flow. Like, should I write my app from scratch? Because like, if I need to write my app from scratch, that will be means that it is going to be very taking like a very long time, and so on and so forth. So the answer for this question is actually no. You don't actually have to write your app from scratch in order to adopt Flutter into your current business flow, like into your current existing app. Why? Because in Flutter there is a mechanism called Flutter add to app, which enable you to integrate a Flutter application, like standalone Flutter application, into your mobile app. In this case, iOS and Android. So let's see a little bit overview on Flutter add to app mechanisms. So Flutter add to app mechanism is currently available for iOS and Android. So that means that if you have a native app which is written in Swift or Kotlin, you could add Flutter into your existing app. And the next is it supports the common Flutter development tools and debugging tools such as hot reload and hot restart and many more. And it has a flexible integration approaches. So there are multiple ways for you to integrate the Flutter app into your existing native app. Where we're going to talk about it in a few minutes. And one more thing is that it is ready for productions. And at Grab itself, we are already implementing this mechanism. In our driver and our passenger app, there are a couple of pages that is written using Flutter, and so far the experience it's been really good. So before we dive deep into how we could integrate a Flutter app into our existing app, I'm going to show you this diagram, which is basically the general overview on how we could integrate our existing our Flutter app into our existing mobile app. So if you are targeting for Android, what you will need to do is you need to build your Flutter app into AAR, or like there are actually like two approaches. Either you're using AAR approach or you are using a source code approach. AAR here is basically the packaging type for Android library. If you are familiar with Java, you might know jar. So this is basically similar to it. And if you're targeting for iOS, you could actually build your Flutter app into a podspec file, which later you can depend on into your native mobile app. In this case, for iOS app. So general working flow into how are we going to develop into how are we going to integrate the Flutter app into our existing mobile app. So as you might see, the first thing that we need to do is we need to have a Flutter code, of course. In this case, we need to create a Flutter module. So Flutter module here basically part of the Flutter source code, which could be easily shared into our into different like native app. So uh, uh, into how we could create the Flutter module. So there are two approaches. The first one is we could create the Flutter module via the Android Studio project wizards, and the second one is via manual approach. First, I'm going to show you how we create it into via Android Studio. So here, like I'm just getting this GIF file from the official documentations, but if you want to try it currently, especially in the recent version of Android Studio, you will not find this mechanism, because this demo is only working for Android Studio version 3.6.1, because the recent changes for the latest changes for Android Studio is they are having like a new wizard template, so you will not see this Flutter module wizards. But to show you like how this is exactly going to be look like in the Flutter module wizard is basically you need to go to the file menu and like create a new module, and then you pick a Flutter Flutter module. You pick that, and then like you specify the project name, which in this case is a Flutter module, and then you specify the SDK path, location, and then like the description. And the last thing is you need to specify the package name. One thing to notice in here that your package name should be different from your native app, or like from your host app. The organization could be the same, but the package name, which in this case is Flutter Dash module, should be different. So after that, you can then click finish. This is the approach via Android Studio. But as I've told you, like if you have the recent Android Studio, that you will not find this wizard. Uh, so so how we could do it in the manual approach? It is pretty similar, and I think it is simple. You could go to your terminal or your command line, and then you're executing this command. The first thing you need to do is you need to I think this is not mandatory, but I will recommend you to do this. You need to group your Flutter module directory with your host app. So for example, in here, like I changed directory at some path where this path exists with my host app, in this case, like Android project. And then you can execute this command like flutter create -t type module, and then like the organizations the organization could be the same at your host app, but the name here, like flutter underscore module, should be different from your host app name, of course. And once you've executed this command, you will get this working directory structure. So if you take a close look, you will see that this is this is like similar to a simple directory for a Flutter app. Like you could see there is a pubspec.yaml file, and then there is a lib file test, and then but one thing that is different here is if you look at the Android and iOS directory, you could see there is a period symbol in front of it, which means that this is actually a utility for your Flutter module, where you could run your Flutter module also standalone, like without the host app itself. And as this is like a hidden directory, you do not need to do a source control on this. So yeah, so in case you want to run your Flutter module as a standalone app, you could still and yeah, as we are already create the Flutter module itself, we will go to look and how we could add this Flutter to our Android app first. Yeah, as I've mentioned before, there are two approaches on the way how we could integrate our Flutter module. The first one is to depend on the Android archive, which in this case is AR file. And then the second approach is to depend on the module source code itself. So we will going to look at the first approach. For all of the approach, one thing that we need to make sure is at our build.gradle file, we need to add this line, which basically means that the target, the compile options for source and target must be Java version 8 or like 1_8. So this is like the mandatory requirement if you want to add your Flutter app into native Android app. And once you add that, for AR approach, the one thing for sure is like we need to build our AR file first. So to be able to do it, we need to go to our Flutter module main directory and execute this command, flutter build AAR. And the result will be something like this. So as in Flutter module itself has three build types or like three build variants. There are a debug, profile, and release. And after executing the Flutter build AR command, you will have these three directory for debug, profile, and release. And as you can see, like there is a AR file underneath it, which later we need to depends in our Android app source code. And what is even more easier is that when you, after you're executing that command, flutter build AR, the in the terminal you will have this tutorial. Like this is basically like the way how you could integrate your AAR into the Flutter AAR into your native Android app. But let's see more closely. So after you have your Flutter AAR files, uh, you need to go to your app/build.gradle file and then put a repository's configurations. And then like in this repository's configuration, you need to have the URL, in this case, pointing to the path where the AR resides. So as you can see here, like the URL is some path Flutter module in under the build directory. So host output / a repo. So that means that this Maven URL will point to the path where our AAR resides. And after that, like we need to also put this Maven URL for download.flutter.io, which going to basically like download all of the necessary component that needed for our integrations. So this configuration is going to work for most of the Android app currently, or like you have like an old Android app. But as I've like trying to create a working example for this talk, I noticed that in the newest version of Android Studio, the repository's configuration is has been moved to the settings.gradle file. So in case like you're using this approach, you need to have this under the dependency resolution management. You need to create a repository's configuration there and basically put the same Maven URL underneath it. And after that, what you will need to do is you in the build.gradle file in the app level, you will need to have this implementation. In this case, like debug and release implementation, that points to the organization's name and then like the version. So, for example, in here in the debug implementations, it will point to the flutter underscore debug AAR file that has version 1.0. This 1.0 version is basically a configuration under in your Flutter source code. That is the same for release implementation as well. Or if you have another build type that you support in your native Android app, you could also put it in here. Yeah, that is for the AR approach. And for the second, depend on the source code. So the first thing you need to do is you go to the settings.gradle file, and then there will be a new line here for set binding and evaluate. If you notice, there is a utility files name include underscore flutter.groovy, which going to have like utility function that is pre-created by the Flutter team for you to be able to easily integrate your source code into your native mobile app. And then after you have these configurations, as the same for the first from the first approach, you need to have it in your build or Gradle. You need to have implementation project, which in this case, this name is the default name. Yeah, Flutter. You need to implement this. But when I try to do this approach, like I've seen some limitations. For example, like you need to make sure that your host app using the same Gradle version with your Flutter module support, and to be able to resolve this kind of like dependency resolution, it's sometimes like a pain for me. So what I recommend to you is like you can follow the AR approach. So that is like the approach in how we could integrate our Flutter app. And the next step is how we could consume the Flutter module into our native mobile app, which in this case, like how we could show our Flutter code from our native app. So the first thing you need to do is you need to register your Flutter activity, of course. So in your Android manifest.xml file, you will need to put this Flutter activity as one of the activity inside of your Android app. This Flutter activity will be the host for all of your entire module, all of the entire of your Flutter module. So later on, we will, if you want to start your Flutter screen, this Flutter activity will be the container of your Flutter code. And once we've added this into our Android manifest, we could then launch our Flutter code via Flutter activity. If you notice, like if you're coming from Android background, you will see that this is basically how we could starting a new activity with creating a new intent. And if you see here, like there is a utility function under the Flutter activity file, which going to create the default intent. And this default intent will basically, as a default, will trigger your Flutter code in a main.dar file. And how about if I have different root, if I have like multiple root and I don't want the default root to be shown first? So you could actually specify your root screen before you are inflating the Flutter activity itself. If you see here, like with new engine dot initial root, for example, like the root name for the initial root is home, then you could just give this one line configurations. Then and then like when you trigger the Flutter activity, you will directly navigate to this specified root. So how does it look like? For example, here in the host app, you'll see that in this code, like when I tap on the hello world button, it will trigger my Flutter screen. Yeah, as simple as that. But how we could improve the performance? So there is something called Flutter engine. A Flutter engine here is basically the engine that going to support all of your Flutter views, animations, logics, and all of the Dart necessary stuff. And we could actually pre-warm the Flutter engine itself. So basically, to be able to improve the performance of our Flutter code in the native Android app, or like in the native app, we could pre-created the Flutter engine first, and then when we and at later some point in our app, we want to trigger the Flutter our Flutter module or our Flutter code, the engine will seamlessly running those Flutter code without needed to create the engine before. So this is basically like the initialization pass. So we could simply put this in our application's source code. So if you see here, like we are creating a Flutter engine instance, and then like we initiated it with the name Rahmat underscore engine, and then later on, once we've running our applications, this Flutter engine will be created also. And after that, when we want to trigger our Flutter code with the pre-created or like with the catch engine, we could simply build the intent with some code like this. Like, so Flutter activity with catch engine, and then like we're going to build it to get the intent. And if you can see, like there is actually a slight improvement. At the left side here, at the demo with the catch engine, and at the right is a without catch engine. So if you can notice that there is a slight delay for the demo that has not create the catch engine, but for the demo that has a catch engine, you could see it is like very very fast, that you cannot even like see that it is a trigger. So this is because the engine is already running, and and like after it is running, once we want to trigger our Flutter activity, it will just simply use that, while the second demo here, like they need to create the Flutter engine before so that's why you will see the delay. Okay, so that is like how easier we could integrate our Flutter app into native Android app. The next steps is I will show you how we could do it in iOS. But before that, I actually have like no deeper experience in iOS. So yeah, so this is basically like the research that I've done. But I actually have no like very deep experience in iOS. But yeah, how we could integrate the Flutter module. As we are already create our Flutter module, so there are actually like also two ways here. So it is similar, like the first approach is to use the Cocoa Pods dependency manager, and this approach is actually divided by two. And then the second approach is to embed the framework in Xcode itself, which is similar to the source code. But from the official documentation, like the recommended approach for this is basically to use the Cocoa Pods dependency manager, which this is a similar, like if you compare it to the Android approach, this is actually similar to build the AR file and let depends it in your Gradle file. So yeah, so in this talk, I'm going to focus on the first approach. But before that, as we are going to use the Cocoa Pods, what we'll need to do is we need to create our pod file. And then if your iOS project, or like if your existing iOS project doesn't have pod file before, sorry, you will need to go to your iOS project directory and execute this pod init command. And after that, there will be a pod file created inside of your iOS project. And then you will need to uncomment the platform first, because this platform means which platform that you're going to support. For example, like we know in 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 Apple environment, there is a iOS, iPad OS, Watch OS, Mac OS, and something like that. But we need to focus on the iOS itself. And once you do that, you will need to execute the pod install. Okay, so we are going to look at the Flutter XC framework first. So here we need, in our pod file, we need to have this configuration. First, we need to have a variable to store our path directory, Flutter path directory. And then we're going to load this file. If you can see here, there is a pod helper.rb here. This is basically similar to Flutter install Groovy that we have in Android integrations. In here, in pod helper.rb, it has the utility to install all of the necessary requirement for us to be able to integrate our Flutter app into the iOS project. And once you add that, in the target, for example, like my host app here is my app, you will need to execute this command, install all Flutter pods, and then specify the Flutter path, which basically from the previous slide. And then this is actually for the native Apple silicons that you will need to execute this command post install. This is actually still in the file. Post install, you will need to do the installer here. Like if it's defined, you need to call the Flutter post install. So this is basically like the boilerplate code that you will need to have in order to integrate your Flutter app into the existing iOS app. And once you do that, in the terminal you need to create the pod install. You need to execute the command of pod install. Yeah, that is basically if you want to using CocoaPod for Flutter XC framework. But for the pod spec, this is similar to AAR, which basically you will need to create the pod spec file for your Flutter module. To be able to do that, you just need to execute this command: Flutter build iOS framework dash cocoa pods. And after that, there will be like also three pod spec file created. This is because of the build types. So there will be a debug mode, profile, and then the release mode. Each of these mod has a pod spec that later on you will need to specify into your pod file, and then you will depend on it. And how we could do this? So basically, in your pod file, you need to define this function called Flutter module pod, which basically you specify what pod spec file that you will need. In this case, like we will name it as a Flutter, and then the path for the pod spec itself is where it resides in our Flutter module source code. So if you can see here, like we need to specify the build mode. So for the development purpose, I will recommend you to use the debug build, because that is going to be very easy to modify and to change. And once you define the Flutter module pod in your target configurations, you will only need to put this Flutter module pod underneath it to be able for when we run pod install, it will download all of the necessary configurations from your Flutter module. Yeah, so that is like how we could integrate the Flutter module into our existing iOS app. And after that, we need to also consume the Flutter module. So how could we do it? So the first thing we need to do is, I'm going to show you like when we are creating an engine, like a catch engine for improvements purposes. So in your app delegate.swift, we need to extend this Flutter app delegate class, and then we will need to create the instance of our Flutter engine. In this case, like the name is my Flutter engine. And then after that, what you will need to do is we need to override this application function, where it comes from the Flutter app delegate, and we need to run the Flutter engine. And after that, if you have this is basically like generated plugin register is an optional. This is where when this we need to put this line if our Flutter module has a Flutter plugin underneath it. But if your Flutter module doesn't have a Flutter plugins, you don't need to add this line. And after we declare all of these necessary lines into our app delegate.swift, we need in our view controller.swift, for example, here, like for responding to the button click, first we need to retrieve our Flutter engine with this command, and then we need to create the Flutter view controller. This Flutter view controller here is it correlates with the Flutter activity if you are from Android background, where you specify the engine that this Flutter view controller will run later. And after you specify the Flutter view controller, you can just easily present it like call present, and then like put your Flutter view controller, and then the result will be something like this. So if you see here, this is the iOS app, And then like when you tap on the hello world, it will trigger the Flutter module from your Flutter code. Yeah, if you see here, like it will come as the default as a modal, but you could actually like change uh, the theme style to full screen to be able to like having a full flow, like full flow of a Flutter applications. Yeah, that's it for iOS integrations. And as you can see, like it is actually like very simple to add. Like you have two approaches via podspec or Gradle. And then like after that, you could also depend on the entire source code. And once you add that, like you only need to trigger your Flutter activity or like a Flutter view controller if you are on iOS. And then after that, the next thing is how we could perform a debugging and hot reload, which I mentioned previously. Like the benefit of using Flutter is because they have this hot reload feature where we could we could have our changes reflected to the app without necessary to rebuilding the app. So to be able to do that, we need to run the Flutter attach. So before running the applications into either your physical device or like either into your emulator or simulator, you will need to execute this command of Flutter attach. And once you've executed this Flutter attach and then you running your applications, you can then like have, for example, this is in Android. You could have it like simply like a usual Flutter application where you can type R for hot reload and then a capital R for hot restart, or even you can detach. And then if you can see here, like the demo here is in Android. So here we depend on the AAR, which means like it's already been packaged as a standalone library. But if we're using a Flutter attack, we could still modify it runtime. As you can see here, like I changed the text, and then like hot reload, it will reflect it. I changed the theme colors, and also it will going to be reflected in the Flutter attack. Yeah, yeah, I think that's basically how you could do the debugging and hot reload. And the integration and also like consuming the Flutter model itself is already been talked. And yeah, so the next thing I would like to say is the limitations. Like, as you know, like if we have a very good technology, there might be some limitations behind it. So what are the limitations for this? So the first limitation is like for now uh, we could only have one Flutter model into our existing native app. That means like if you have a different flow of Flutter, if you have different business flow that you would like to write using Flutter, you will need to combine it into one Flutter, uh, either AAR or podspec file, because multiple Flutter libraries is not supported yet. And then if you have a plugin that is using add to app on Android, it should be migrated to the new Android plugins, which based on the Flutter plugin itself. So if you have like kind of old plugins that you want to use in the add to app, you will need to make sure that in Android, if it's like a Flutter plugin for Android, you will need to make sure that this Flutter plugin is already using the newest Android plugin APIs. And the next is plugins that do not support Flutter plugins. It might have like unexpected behavior, like if they have make assumption that Flutter sorry the activity or like the Flutter engine is already available I mean, like if the Flutter engine is available every time, but if you don't have like plugins inside of your Flutter model, yeah, you're just going to ignore it. And for the Android app itself, if you want to add Flutter model to your existing Android app, you it currently only support Android X applications. But I think like I'm sure that if you have like native Android app that you are regularly maintain, and like you update it, I don't know, monthly or weekly, you must support Android X application. So like this is kind of like edge cases. So for you that want to dive deeper on this, because like this talk is mostly like covering all of the skins, the outer skins. If you want to dive more deeper, this is like a good resource that you could start on. And this is the official documentation and one Medium article that is very useful for me. And okay, I think that's all for my talk. I think I can give it back to MC. And this is like my handle. If you want to contact me, like you have any questions in Flutter or like in software engineering as general, feel free to connect, and then like we can discuss. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I could. If you have any questions, please go to the Q&A sections. I already checked some of the questions here. Like, okay, from Creme de la Creme, can we also use Flutter on Google Colab? Um, Google Colab, like me personally, I haven't tried, but I'm not quite sure. Like the Google Colab um is like created for Python. I'm not quite sure, but from my experience, I haven't tried to use it. But if you want to use a Flutter, like uh, there is a playground website called darkpath.dev, where you could basically build a Flutter app without need to download all of the necessary SDK. You could run it in the web itself. So the website called darkpath.dev, and then if you visit the website, you will have two options whether you want to create Dart source code or Flutter app source code. So if you want to try Flutter without downloading all of the necessary SDK, you could go to that website. But for the Google Colab, I'm not quite sure for that. Okay. Yeah, I think we can go to the next questions. What is the best approach to monitor crashes in our Flutter module when the host app has Firebase Crashlytic in it? Oh yeah, so this is actually a good questions. So when you have when you in your host app you already have a Crashlytic installed, in your Flutter module you could actually use the Crashlytic itself. But before you are using the Crashlytics, because like in Crashlytics we must have one Firebase project, right? And inside of the host app, let's talk about Android. Yeah, in Android, that when you imported your Firebase JSON file, and in your Flutter app you don't need to import it again. Instead you could easily depends on the Flutter package, because the Crashlytics has their own Flutter package. and and then after that you can easily you can like directly use those for in the same project. So in your Crashlytics dashboard later you will find like the stack trace for your native app crashes, and also in your in your Flutter module crashes. So basically we could host it into one Firebase project, but something that we need to consider is the versioning, because like when you already have Crashlytic installed in your native host app, you will need to make sure that those version is also being supported in your Flutter in your Flutter module that depends on the Crashlytics Flutter package. But usually when you're using Gradle, if there is a mismatch between the package itself, the Gradle will try to use the latest one. But yeah, most of the time it won't be a problem. But if you have a problem, you will need to make sure that the version is the same, and then you could how to say, like you could use it both in your Android and then in your Flutter source code. Yeah. I hope that answered the questions. And then yeah, the next question, why use Flutter is, yeah. I think for this question is it 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 again so my answer here will be very subjective. So why I tend to use Flutter instead of KMM is because um in if you like this is like from my personal opinion. Yeah, so when you are using Flutter for and then integrate it into your native app, you will only need to focus on the Dart code itself, in the Flutter code itself. So the learning curve will be more like specific to Flutter only. But if you are using KMM, at some point, especially like when writing the UI, you will still need to depends on the platform specific, which is in this case like when you're creating the UI, you will need to depends on the Android Android View, or like maybe Compose. But and then in iOS, you will be depends on the UI kit, or maybe like Swift UI. But for me personally, I haven't like really dig deep into the KMM itself. But as this is like yeah, so my the point of my answer is, if you're using Flutter, you will only need to focus into one specific area, which is Flutter itself. But in KMM, at some point, you might still need to use uh, each platform specific source code. So that is basically the answer for me. But it actually depends on you, like which one that you prefer. But that's like my answer for this question. Yeah, it's actually interesting question. Thank you. Um,
Okay.
Hello, Alia, Iza. Do we have questions live from there?
No.
Oh, okay. Then I think if no more questions, I think we've covered all of the questions.